they are legally bound. They are medically, legally bound to rob you of hope, because if they give you too much hope, you can sue them. And so this is really important sometimes for families to recognize that you have to almost put on a different lens.
Welcome to the Experience Miracles podcast, where we help parents find hope, answers, and drug-free help to overcome your child's chronic health challenges. I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, and I'll be sharing my experiences as both a dad and a doctor on every episode. I can take the latest science and neurology of healing and break it down in the most simple and relatable way possible. We'll take on the toughest topics and answer your biggest questions through interviews with other amazing parents and leading experts, leaving you with practical action steps that you can take to help your child heal and thrive. It's time to expect and experience miracles. Let's get started. Oh man, parents, this episode's going to blow your mind. You are going to have your whole family's lives transformed with this episode. I think we can say that. I know we can say that about every podcast episode here on the Experience Miracles podcast. We are very choosy about our guests and our topics because we just want to impact and create not just a little bit of change or kind of sort of bit of change for your family. We don't want to repeat the same thing that every other natural health podcast says. Oh, you got to clean up your diet, turn off screens, get outside. Yes, those are vitally important things. But today, one of my best friends, one of my just absolute lock-in step with me for well over a decade now, world changers, joins me for an incredible interview podcast episode. Dr. Stanton Hom is the founder of Future Generations, a global movement. You better believe this man is all about making a movement, normalizing vibrant health for our families and communities by providing freedom, focused care, and education. After graduating from the United States Military Academy at West Point and earning a Bachelor's of Science in Pre-Medicine, Dr. Stan was fortunate enough to be selected for an internship at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. But his path shifted when he decided to pursue chiropractic instead of a medical degree after serving our great country. And we will let him dive into why he made that choice and what his own personal health transformation and experience was. And you're going to learn so much from just that first 5 minutes alone. Since graduating from the prestigious, that's an inside joke within chiropractic, Los Angeles College of Chiropractic in 2010, he has served the San Diego community, specializing in the whole family from preconception through birth, infants, childhood, and beyond. Dr. Stan is one of our leading what we call perfect storm centers. We will make any and all referrals to Dr. Stan and always have for a long period of time, but I especially know if a tough case of autism or epilepsy or those sort of neurological challenges is in need in San Diego, I know that Dr. Stan and his Future Gen team are going to provide them with world-class care. And he is also the host of the Future Generations podcast. As an informed dad, an incredible PX doc, neurologically focused, principled pediatric chiropractor, he leads a worldwide movement alongside of us that stands for health freedom for all generations. This man has impacted my life. I love every conversation I have with Dr. Stan. Every conversation I've ever had with him is about this. How do we make the lives of millions of kids and families significantly, radically, incredibly better? This conversation will do that job unlike any other podcast episode you've ever listened to. This is one you're going to want to go all the way through, probably 3 times over, and share it far and wide, because in order to change the world for future generations, this is the exact conversation we all need to be having, be a part of, and that starts with, for you, all awesome rock star moms and dads listening in as Dr. Stan and I go right into the thick of it and change your family's life as a result of it. All right. Okay, my friend, Dr. Stan, Dr. Stanton, do you feel like when people call you Dr. Stanton, is that like if someone were to call me Dr. Anthony, does that mean you're in trouble if Stanton comes out the full name? Where do you feel on that, bud?
That's kind of a funny, that's a longer story, dude. Like when I was younger and I was like selectively mute. I had all sorts of weird, like, it's one of the reasons why I'm like so drawn to PX and so drawn to everything that you've been doing as far as like your story and the journey. But I've always had a hard time saying my name, but I love it. I love my name. I love my full name. It's just, all my speech issues come out when I say it.
Understood. Sometimes, you and I, we like to move so fast as we can in this world to help as many kids as we can. And so sometimes we just trim back a few syllables, right? And maybe just save ourselves a little time and get there as quickly as possible. Awesome. Speaking of our story, no good interview when we get into the actions, when we get into the science, when we get into the steps that we know we can help parents take to move their kiddos away from sickness, away from chronic illness, away from the system that, deep down they all know they feel incongruent and unattached and not benefiting from. We're going to get into the action steps, but we always really want to just get to know the people that we love to bring on the podcast. And so story matters, right? Story is going to give us your heart. It's going to give us the context. It's going to give us that. So when you go back into your story here, buddy, man, and you're at that decision point of like, okay, you knew you wanted to go into healthcare. You knew you wanted to go help folks. You served and went to West Point and took that path. And then this one came about. Why did you choose to be a chiropractor? What was it about the principles? What was it about the science? What was it about? I don't know. What was it about that you chose this path primarily to take your mission into?
It was personal experience, right? You gave a little bit of my history. 17 years old, I was low crawling in the mud of West Point. You fast forward 5 years later, and I'm in Iraq, and in my early 20s, telling young 18-year-old privates that I'm going to take you home. Like you're scared out of your mind, and I'm going to take you home, and everything's going to be great. You get home and you don't realize it, but you have a level of chronic illness by the mid 20s that largely is normal today, right? It's normalized today. It's common today in our kids. And I remember at the same time being able to bench press like 335. I could run a 12-minute 2 mile. I could do anything I wanted to. Anything I wanted to physically to put my mind to. The military told me I was healthy as could be, clean bill of health. They out-processed me, go out into the world. And all my friends were going to Harvard, MBA, Kellogg, MBA, virtually every top MBA program in the world. And I was going to San Diego.
Yeah.
And that's all I knew. And that's where I am now. And my brother was a chiropractor here. And I moved here. And I literally pull up after a road trip through Vegas, obviously, from Texas all the way to San Diego. And he just looks at me and goes, dude, are you okay? I was like, I'm fantastic. Why do you ask? And he was a chiropractor, and he had a different lens to look at function and to look at root cause and to look at nervous system regulation or dysregulation. And I realized that I had 4 diagnosable chronic problems: gut, pain, stress, PTSD, you name it. And virtually by my mid-20s, I had it. And I went through my own kind of healing transformational journey where I started to understand what you have codified as the perfect storm. And I walked myself out of it. And chiropractic was my foundation. Chiropractic was my root. My nervous system was the ground that I stood upon. And I changed virtually every aspect of my lifestyle that I could. And in 6 months, he was like, dude, I think you're my healthiest patient. He's like, you went from my sickest, youngest patient to my healthiest patient. Yeah. But one thing, as I went to chiropractic school, or I was going to chiropractic school, is I was classically a C- English student, classically. And my English for AP, how I got into AP English, who knows, right? He looks at me about to take the English test, AP test. He's like, I don't think you should take it. I was like, that's really great, Mr. Holmes. I'm not going to take it. He's like, good. Because, English is your second language. And I was like, no, English, Mr. Holmes, English is my only language, bro. He obviously stops in his tracks. I go to take English at Mesa College, local college here in San Diego, and didn't have any idea at the time. Enjoyed it. Did every assignment, was super stoked. I didn't even see the contrast or change or difference. And my teacher says to me, I think you're one of the most prolific writers that I've ever actually taught. And it was this cathartic moment for me where I was like, wait a minute, dude. Like, I just reversed gut, inflammation, pain, a lot of anxiety, PTSD. but I didn't even know that my brain was going to work better.
Yeah.
And I mean, to this day, I would consider myself like this completely transformed kid because I had experienced that since I remember being 10 years old in 5th grade, and I would not read out loud because I was so anxious, but I wouldn't read because I couldn't read out loud very well. And all of a sudden I was this radically transformed, optimally performing mid-20s, and I went into chiropractic school like that. Never turned back.
That's our conversation today, buddy. That's the conversation you have on your podcast and with your patients every single day, and we have on our platform with our patients every single day. We set our sights on radical, definitely unbelievable transformation of health, yes, but actually our goals for our patients, everybody out there listening, our goals for you are radical transformation of your life. And yes, we're coming out swinging, with the heavy bat, the big bat, and we're just saying what we mean to say, which is this: when you look at health, there's two real muddy, distorted, limited lenses that we need to get you past first with health. Number one is that we look at health through a lens of conventional medicine, which is we don't have any control over our health. And therefore, sometimes there's just bad genes, bad genetics, bad programming, and we're going to have these symptoms. But if we take this first lens on, we can totally, as Dr. Stan said a minute ago with his story, we just normalize that. We just say, well, yeah, that's what it's going to be. Your babies are going to be colicky, and they're going to be fussy, and they're going to be sick, and they're going to be stressed, and they're going to go down this road, and our veterans are going to that's what they're going to be. So the conventional lens is one of normalizing chronic illness. Not okay. But I actually want to keep digging a little deeper. And Stan, I'm going to run, and I know you're going to love this and run with this. The second lens that we actually want to take you past as well with this conversation today is that when you transform your child's health and when you transform your kiddo's health and your health even, you're actually not just getting rid of bad things. You're not just getting rid of symptoms. Now, there's nothing in this second lens here or second kind of part of this story that we should limit, because it's amazing if a child was chronically constipated and now they're not. It's amazing if a child was chronically sick and now they're not. It's amazing if they were chronically full of anxiety and depression and now they're not. So this list of bad symptoms that go away, that is transformative in and of itself. But there's a third lens we want you to see. There's a third layer of transformative healing that you, your child, and your family will get to if you set your sights and your goal on that. And that is your whole life transforms. That is the thing they were going to study when they couldn't study at all. The thing they were going to invent that they would have never invented before. The job that they're going to dominate at that they never would have applied for before. The list goes on. We're in the business of life. And so, but we can't get to lens 3, right, Dr. Stan, with our homies and with our patients in our community, if we don't really get to show them first that lens 1, that's not the lens you want to live your life in. And actually lens 2, we may think, oh, naturally, holistically, we're attacking our health. But for what? What's the big end game goal? It's to transform these kids' lives so it's truly limitless and there's really nothing to it. But a lot of times, first steps. So what I really wanted to have is, as we were chatting ahead of time, I really want to get into action steps throughout this whole thing, early, middle, and often of our conversation. And to get to that, end of the rainbow, metaphorically, you can't stay stuck in a place surrounded by people and philosophies and perspectives that don't even know that exists, right? You can't stay stuck in the system. So when you hear me have this conversation and you think about your transformative life journey and now doing that for other patients, how essential is it to have the conversation about what the medical system really is doing to their lives, what its intent and its design and its action steps are? We don't like to live in the negative and we don't like to live in the dark, but if we don't expose it, it's a lot harder to see the light, right?
Yeah, it's the most common, right? Like I would argue that I am one of the more forward-facing chiropractors in the health freedom movement, health and medical freedom movement. And I go to these rallies and I go to these these big events where these families are trying to free themselves from the system. And honestly, there's 2 questions that I get asked, the most common. One is, do you know any good pediatricians? That's the first one, right? And the second one is, do you take my insurance? Right. And it's an interesting dynamic, right? Because we don't quite recognize how stuck we are to the system. Because sometimes I'll just ask right away, I'm like, why do you think you need a pediatrician? Not
right.
Antagonistically, just curiosity. And it is one of the first times where I see parents like, wait a minute, I think we're just supposed to have one. And you're like, but what do you want them for? And what do you mean good pediatrician? And the definition then comes out. There's so many different ways that people would view a good pediatrician. It's like, okay, on one end, it's like, they're open-minded. They may be open to natural they may be a little bit more conservative. They may not go straight to antibiotics. They may not, coerce about all these different medical products. And like, interesting. Okay. And then you go a little deeper and they're like, well, I really just don't want someone to kick me out of their practice, right? I've been hearing that more. Like, if I don't do something, if I don't do a mandatory injection or something like that, then they dismiss me out of my practice. And then there's a further level where they're like, there's a lot of weird shame and coercion that comes with the recommendation. And you start to peel back, and then you start to recognize, like, these are really interesting realities that virtually every parent that is on our side of the fence that understands that there's much more than a conventional healthcare system available to us, meaning most of us, like we've been in practice around the same amount of times. How much do we learn from moms? How many platforms today do we see, blogs, Instagram profiles, and you're like, dude, that's actually well researched. That's better than I learned in postgrad. Ooh, that's interesting. That's really weird for the postgrad, right? Like, all these things you start to recognize that moms are so forward facing, and they're the pathfinders in this mission. And then they think that they go into this office and they're like, whoa, like they're hit with like this repulsion. And what it is a repulsion of values, right?
It is. They
don't recognize that and this is something I tell even young docs, right? Because they're just like, somebody posted in the PX group, like, how do you get rid of imposter syndrome, right? Like, and you're like, well, on your worst day, on our worst day,
yes, sir,
we're far safer, and we are infinitely more effective at getting to the root cause of what's going on our worst day. So on our worst day, you're not going to hurt people. You're not going to kill someone. You're not going to give them something that has a laundry list of side effects that is all bad, that includes rectal bleeding, death, and all sorts of weird things that is a part of their standard of care. And so you start to peel back that parents are like, wait a minute, I'm being hit by this repulsive energy of like the value set where I don't actually, my values are here. The conventional system is here. Maybe they do save lives in that model, and that's something we should be infinitely grateful for. Medicine saved my life 3 times. I'm grateful for that. But there's a chasm of incongruency that if it isn't somehow reconciled, you're going to run into issues. But what we don't recognize is what you're sharing that the paradigm, right? The best they got, and the only thing they look at is that visual analog scale of what is your scale of symptoms? 10, 11, 50. What's the goal? 0, right? No symptoms, right? And that, like you said, is a huge victory. You have chronically paralyzing anxiety, and then you don't, is a victory, right?
Yeah.
But you also have DCE, all the letters of the side effects that you have. I promise I know the alphabet, right? I said DCE, like I can't speak straight. But you don't realize that there's that other aspect of all the potential pitfalls that you have by their recommendations. And in the end, what do you do about it, right? Yeah. And then you go back to that same question, and parents are just like, well, maybe I don't want that. Maybe I just think I need that because somebody told me that I'm supposed to have that.
Yep.
And in the end, you start to recognize that it's actually the vehicle that they may not actually want, knowing that that's the only car they think is available, when in reality, there's a whole lot.
It's wild.
And one of them, like our vehicle, is one of the most effective, efficient, at getting to the root cause in ways that virtually no other provider can today.
And it's and when you find that perfect match vehicle, there's a real essential reality that you won't be able to fully access it and get everything from it that is so perfectly what you want for your family and for your own health if you're still even a tiny little pinky toe or pinky finger attached to the system that doesn't want you to have it. And so the reality of this whole story is this: we live in this world where, thankfully, and you know, it's not an easy thing to get rid of, especially with how stressed kids are these days. But, you know, bullying exists in schools, and there is multiple organizations and assemblies and conversations, and every parent on earth doesn't want their child bullied, and they don't want to have their child be a bully. And then they go to the pediatrician and the conventional system, and they get bullied all the time, nonstop. That is literally what's happening. And so this was such a crazy last 24 hours, you know, as we were getting ready to, and I shared this with you here, buddy, that, you know, there's 1,000+ topics that you and I are very passionate about, very experienced about. And if we chose them for lead topic of conversation for this episode, we would make families' lives, we could help make families' lives better by any list of these 999 other topics. And you have your sheet where there was all these different things that you love to talk about, have talked about on the Future Generations podcast. And I was going through them in my crazy brain. Of course, I'm like, oh man, I love them all. You're making it hard to choose. Which one is it going to be? And then this one stood out on the sheet. This one that I know you, especially recently, as well, like me, are so passionate about. And that is getting parents to know that they have a choice. Really what we keep saying if you're hearing us say, unplug from the system or be able to leave from the system, the first step in what we're really saying is understand that you're the boss. Moms and dads, understand that you're in charge. Moms and dads, understand that you have a choice. And right now, you are not being given informed choice. And so that was my choice, our choice, Dr. Stan and I, to really have this conversation for this episode today. And as God often, always, really for me right now, I'm on a hot streak with my relationship up there. It's every single day. He's just sending me signs of, this is the right choice. This is the right step to help millions of kids and families on this planet. And so we decided on this topic, and we're recording on a Tuesday. I go into practice on a Monday. And one of my dearest patients and families, I love caring for this family, Stan. I respect these parents at just an incredible level. They are empowered, they are intelligent, and they are just caring and loving, and they're doing a great job. And the final step in their healing journey, truthfully, I'm just going to say what I intend to say so we don't miss the action of this story. Their final step is they need to fire their outdated bully of a pediatrician to get their girls all the way healthy. That transformative full experience that we led this sucker off with, they have one remaining finishing step, right? Because on Monday morning before seeing me, they went back in there, regularly scheduled default. I don't want to do it, but I kind of feel like I got to do it. Exactly what you said. You know, nobody's making these choices that end up with sick kids by active choice. We're making it by default. And moms and dads, you don't get great health and a wonderful life by default. It takes informed choice and very intentional actions. And that's what we're here to help serve and give you. And so what happened? What happens in millions of cases every single day in an office like that? They used fear. They used anxiety. They absolutely exaggerated the truth clinically. They absolutely exaggerated the truth about what's going around locally, you know, and they forced this family. There's no other word for it. They absolutely manipulated and forced a medical procedure into this family. And now, one, the child has to heal and detox from that. That's not good. We'll get the job done. Do not worry. That will happen. But two, now mom's got to heal. You know, now there's another layer of emotional stress and burden on mom that will affect her health because she knows she got bullied. She knows that didn't match with her values. And now she has to live with that tension until we can get to the other side of it. So this conversation isn't just, you know, oh, these are the conversations chiropractors have. No, this is the conversation the world needs to have right now. And Stan, you are leading it. And I respect you and I love you. And that's why these are the first questions I wanted to ask you. So where does that, and maybe actually even a good question, right, buddy, is when is a good time for that conversation to begin with parents that says, okay, I need to walk you through something. And we're not going to tell you, we're going to ask some Socratic questions. We're going to engage into a conversation. But the goal of the conversation is to really ask that question. Well, do you really need a pediatrician? Do you really want to still be plugged into that system? Or are you okay using it for what it's amazing at? Only emergency, crisis, intervention in that way. So how do you most effectively, through your podcast, through your incredible practice out there in San Diego, how do you begin that conversation? What are some effective first components of that?
One of the premises I start with is that, and I've said this for years, that when we specifically talk about shots, because I would say that is the leverage that is the most prominent in terms of when parents go into offices and
for sure.
shame and coercion and dismissal of families, right? When they get dismissed, I usually say, do you feel at all like they did you a favor? And invariably, some parents are like, yeah, like they'll say it straight away. And you're like,
Truth.
Okay, that's really important. And sometimes I invite questions right away, not because I'm antagonistic, but because it's actually just very nonchalant. And I just ask them because sometimes it's the first time they may make that synapse in their brain to think about that, right? But my premise when I teach workshops about shots, especially here in California, where it is absolutely like the belly of the beast in terms of leveraging that for school and things like that. Like, I know for a fact already it is the number one conversation. It's the number one question that parents have in their mind when they're thinking about conventional medicine. And in my view, I've found that the more I've invited that question and offered that opportunity and space for parents to just express whatever they need to express, that the gold comes out every time. And so it starts with the intake forms. It always is like this kind of history, but also, did you know you had a choice? Did you notice any reactions? And then do you want more questions or do you have more questions? Do you have any more, do you want more information about the safety of vaccines? Because I asked that specifically about safety because that is my myopic focus when it comes to that intervention. And so usually when parents go through those questions before COVID, like I would say still 75 to 80% would be like, yeah, I kind of want more information. They may be invested. Their kids may be fully vaccinated. And honestly, through my view, I have no attachment to patients' choices,
Correct.
Which is very different than conventional healthcare, right? If they don't want to sign up for care, if they don't want to take my recommendations for anything, I don't go home with your child and I'm not responsible for the late nights. I'm not responsible for all those types of things. So it's your skin in the game, not mine, but it is my responsibility to lead.
Nor are you going to kick them out if they don't follow your Druckerian dictator. You're a doctor, not a dictator. Is that what you're saying? And you actually build, I tell my patients that all the time, like, hey, this is a partnership style practice, not a dictatorship style practice. Mm-hmm. We will answer all of your questions. We will provide you with information and resources, but we will do it in the most empowering way that leads you to the place that you want to go. We're not going to, there's zero of the bad stuff here, but man, yeah. So sorry, I just wanted to pull on that thread
it's all
because
good,
it's so important that people hear that from us. We're this passionate about it for you, but we're always going to continue to be passionate. We're going to continue to care for you. We're going to continue to rally for you. We're going to continue to love and support and take care of you, regardless of which decision and direction you take with this very important decision. And I think that's pretty telling right there. Like, that's the kind of doctor you want on your team, not the one that gets defensive, runs a dictatorship style practice. And if you don't follow lock and step, they kick you out. That's a sign of weakness. That's a sign of insecurity. That's a sign of lack of certainty. And that's a sign of, I don't want responsibility for the reality. Okay. And we operate a little differently. All right, buddy. Sorry.
And I make that statement sometimes just like you do, just like you just did, right? Because when you have that environment and that space in your office, and it is an intentional creation, right? You create a space for openness, for compassion, for empathy, but also, like you've always taught me, empathy and authority, right? But it's an authority that isn't a dictatorship. And I'll usually joke. I'll say doctor means teacher. Doctor means shepherd. Doctor means mentor. Doctor means leader. Doctor means partner. Doctor does not mean do what I say, take these pills, and don't ask me any questions and take them forever, right? And I'll say those words sometimes, and parents just they start to snicker because they know, and they already know that that's what that system is kind of based upon. You peel the layer of the onion further, man, you start to realize like maybe this is a little too far, but most people don't know that law enforcement in hospitals isn't there for you. Law enforcement in hospitals is there for CPS. And so that you actually, and so that's the space that parents already know. Parents of our brand of understanding and openness and willingness to take their kids' health by the horns, like they want to be assured that they're going to make and be able to make any choice that they want to. Yeah. And so when I use that same line where it's just like, hey, doctor doesn't mean this, like doctor doesn't mean shame and coercion and do exactly what I tell you, don't ask me any questions. It already is speaking to something that they have in the back of their mind. If parents write no, they don't want any more information on the safety of shots, I don't touch it right away, but I know that at least 75% of the time, parents actually do want more information. Yeah. I'm just not going to shove it down their face. So what we do is we just create an environment where we know that the value set that parents have, that our value set is going to meet and exceed their idea of what openness, of what empathy is, of what true leadership and authority is. And then in that space where you elevate your standards, you love them so much that they begin to climb that ladder on their own. And then all the questions come out. And then they start to, and then they become the advocates, right? Then the dads become the advocates, right? Dads are often like in the backseat. 89% of choices are made by moms. Sometimes dads are the reason why families don't start care. But when dads climb that ladder with us, it's gangbusters. It's over.
That's a cool little tidbit. That is a very life-changing transfer. I'm going to keep kind of like hanging each component of our conversation back to the beginning of the conversation. What are we going for? Transformative, full family life. I mean, get the most out of it with the time that God gives us here. And that is radically opposite to the life most people are living, where they've accepted illness. They've accepted, I go to the doctor to be told what to do. I have a dictator. Like, so often this is subconscious, by the way. This is past. These are learned behaviors by our parents. These are learned behaviors by big old marketing companies that actually run the medical system. So none of this is our fault. This all occurs via default, not our fault. But it is up to us. It is absolutely our responsibility to access podcasts like this, learn what's really going on, and be able to move forward in a direction toward the life we want to live. And I'm going to repeat that sentence one more time because Dr. Stan knows that this is how I teach the entire PX tribe always. I am obsessed with the bad stuff and shining the light into the darkness and saying, these things are not good. They're very bad. Here's all the reasons they're bad. Here's all the science that they're bad. And that needs to be told. That truth, that science, that reality needs to be told. It's most effective told. It's most effectively shared with people when they're moving towards you, when they're asking questions from you. So what we've led within our chiropractic movement, and now we're leading into this world with the PX Docs platform and in partnership with Future Gen, in partnership with BirthFit, the Ancient Health podcast, all of our homies, is saying, let's move you towards the root cause. Let's move you towards understanding the principles of natural health, nervous system focused chiropractic and healing. Let's get you excited about the outcomes you're going to get. And oh, by the way, on that journey, that's going to open up the opportunity for some of these tough, for sure tough, but really important conversations that will get you there. And I love this like crazy because the truth of the matter is this then turns you, and I'm going to double tap on what Dr. Stanton said, this turns you into the advocate. And do you know what your child needs to get healthy? They need you more active in this, more empowered, more in the know, and I'm going to say more dangerous for good, right? More dangerous for the good. You will impact your child's life 1,000 million times more than we will, more than their pediatrician, or more than anything else. So our obsession with empowering you, moms and dads, is we know who you're going to pass that down to. And I think I'm really speaking to why Dr. Stan his platform is called Future Generations, and why one of the very most important action steps is empowering parents and teaching them informed choice, because we know where that's going to be passed down to our kiddos. We're going to teach them to live that life through that lens themselves. And here's what's cool. it won't be new to them. It won't be alternative to our kiddos. It won't be stepping outside of the system to our kiddos. Mark our words. This podcast played back 30, 40, 50 years from now, our kids are going to be like, why'd you guys have to get so punchy with this? You telling me people didn't know that fourth booster wasn't going to be so good? You know, like pretty obvious, right? And we're going to be like, not as obvious as we wish it was here, you know, grandchild that we love so much. Okay, buddy. So carrying this forward into action, all right? When we're first starting out and our patients are moving in this direction, how important is it to create a space? And I know you already said this, so I'm intentionally going deeper in something that I think is so essential. How important is it to have a doctor, a teacher, a guide, a partner, and then a whole practice environment that parents can plug into that is a safe space to ask their tough questions? And not only can you teach us why it is important for parents to ask questions, even the ones that you feel like are kind of hidden down dark and you're not supposed to ask. Those are the most important ones to ask.
Yeah.
Why is that so important? And then what are the cheat codes if they ask those questions of a doctor? And by the way, let's put all the initials now in this part of the conversation. I don't care right now whether it's a pediatrician or a chiropractor, but if those questions are not welcomed and if those questions are not answered with authority and experience, is that the doctor they should trust? Can you run that one out for us? That space for questions, the need for questions, and what families get out of asking questions to their doctors.
I mean, questions are the essential nature to move anything forward, right? It's not necessarily about, like, a lot of people are looking for answers, which answers are great, but answers stop, right? Questions invite curiosity, and questions invite you to recognize actually more about your family values and more about your sometimes intergenerational trauma from the medical system and the intergenerational programming of that system. And if you're only looking for the answer, sometimes that is very short-sighted, right? Sometimes it's unsustainable. And so questions is, I would say, the invitation for questions and the space for questions allows for families to actually potentially collaborate more and recognize that, ooh, like we have these core families that are around my family, but all of us are uniquely different in the way. We have one family that has a line all the way to smallpox, never had a shot. And you're like, whoa, like I didn't even know that there were resistors in like the 1800s to the degree that, you know, BJ and D.D. Palmer wrote about in books, right? But their family values is different than my family values. We have a rancher and another family, and we're like, whoa, they're different. And we have another family that, like, they had an injury, right? And you're like, interesting, right? So all of us actually navigate very differently. But when you have questions, you have humility. When you have humility, you have a level of curiosity that invites community in a way that optimizes diversity and not homogenizing the worldview, which has obviously been normalized today, right? It's normalized today that whatever is parroting on that box, the idiot box, is just like, okay, that's what I'm going to believe. And anybody that doesn't go against it, I'm interviewing a nurse from Kaiser in the next month who literally can talk the entire journey of 2020 to 2023 about how she couldn't just say, hey, I don't know if this thing is, I don't know if this therapy is working. Can we do something different? That was the standard of care before. Fired. You know, you're like, that's crazy, right? And so the point of what I'm saying is what you know and what we all know today is that there is a homogenized worldview, that there's only one acceptable narrative, and it is to exalt this sometimes very ungodly system, right? Yeah. And you may like your doctor, you may like your insurance company, you may like your hospital, but if you peel back the curtain all the way to the people that pull the puppet strings behind all those things, I don't think anyone in the world today would agree that they care about your kids, right? And so because of that, parents are already kind of in this space of knowing that I need to figure out who's actually going to advocate for me. Yeah. And in that space is a encyclopedia, multiple volumes of questions that largely conventional medicine would make into one worldview, right? But largely conventional medicine wouldn't even field because they would actually just downplay the validity of multiple questions that they have. But they also start with the premise, which you said earlier, is that there's really no hope and there's no point, because you're genetically predispositioned, not just not to heal, but for generational demise and disease and destruction that they've convinced a generation of parents is normal in kids. And so because of that, parents already know. And they need to recognize, because I will admit, right? Some parents come in, they're like, I had to give her 2 shots. And I was like,
yeah.
How are you feeling about that? She's like, oh my gosh, I thought you were going to be so mad at me. I was like, I will never be mad at you for a choice that you've ever made, because behind that, I can feel already you not wishing that you had to make that choice, but I know your family environment and I know potentially what the drivers are. And the question that I have in my heart is, Mom, do you and your family need my care more now? Do you need our services and our compassion and our love more now, or before you were forced into that situation? And every time moms are just like, whoa, like, whoa, like that's a deeper layer of taking your values and escalating them, ascending them so high that you're recognizing that mom in that space that had some trepidation because I'm so vocal about things, we're just going to love her more than we ever have. Buddy. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think
that's the doctor. That's the doctor that you grow closer to then. And again, by often through these challenges, we grow closer to the people that we really need to impact our lives, primarily in the toughest of times, right? In the darkest of times. In the perfect storm is where we actually end up with a lot of the answers, right? And a lot of the connections and a lot of the relationships to, this is the doctor that's going to get me through the storm. This is the practice. This is the community. This is the parent advocacy group that's going to get me through the storm. I wish we all found our way there through the good, through the easy. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Which ones of us did? I can't think of one literally right now. It's like, it's through the storm is to where you get those people in your life. And I want to pull on that, because here's what's crazy. What I wrote down when you were sharing that, and I don't want to say this out loud, okay? This son of a gun right here, what I'm about to say is so emotional, and it's so true, and it happens all the time that Stan knows me. I'm a big, loving pansy. I'm tough when I need to be tough, but you know, I'm tough on the inside and wussy on the outside. All right, let me get to it. It is essential that they take your hope away first, because then they'll stop and mute all your questions second. You won't have the belief, you won't have the hope, and therefore you won't have the questions, and you won't cause problems within the system. Now, that came to my brain as Dr. Stan was happening, because they tried to do it to me, everyone. Yeah. While Oliver was in the hospital for those 6 weeks, you can listen to the interview. You want to talk about seeing my softer, more emotional side. I didn't make it through our interview. I can't remember whether it's the second or the third episode. It's really early on our Experience Miracles podcast here, so you can listen to it after this one. But Christina and I sit down right here in the studio we're in. We call it our Green Chair series, and our team interviewed us about our experience. And the most memorable component of my experience with Oliver in the NICU is, number one, lead horse, is the miracle. The good, the amazing, watching him heal, watching on the monitors, watching on his EEGs, watching, I'm Tony the science guy, watching the science of chiropractic come to life and create a miracle, watching what God gave me and granted me and taught me do its thing. The almost as memorable emotional component of being in the NICU is how pissed off, angry, upset they made me when they did everything they could to extinguish our hope for our son because they did not like my questions, buddy man. I know for sure that the first page of the big binder that was Oliver's, this is a little bit before everything went electric. It's like, electronic. Some of it's electronic. And each baby in the NICU, they had this big mental counter and they all had their binders. So they'd come in and do the rounds in the morning. You're in there for 6 weeks. You learn their systems and you're a doctor. And I would watch them come in, and I would watch anybody new. Like if they called in, jabroni number 3, to take me on, Dr. Jabroni number 3 especially in the neuro world. I was like, how many neurologists you got in here? Why don't you all line up and we'll talk about the nervous system, you 7 versus me, and see who comes out on top. Okay, you can tell where this emotion gets me, right? And they would open the first page of that binder, and I swear it said in big, bold red letters, beware, they ask questions. Dad knows this stuff. And they hated that, dude. They hated that I asked questions. And we're exposing this. We're talking about on this podcast episode because moms and dads, we know that out of this whole hour, if you can go forward and do one thing, it'll change the whole, that's your chance for transformation. Ask questions. Ask them. Ask them. And number one, the doctor better take time. If they have it, they probably have a shot clock. They're 40 minutes behind and they're supposed to spend 3 minutes with you in that room. But take the time to ask the questions. Number two, can they actively listen? Are they already going to give you a default answer? So they're answering, but they're just kind of like AI in human form, you know, and they're just spitting out that answer. And then number three, does it even get close to the root cause? And I've got one more thing that I want to pull deep on this and turn this reality into a question for you too, because we're helping every parent in this. And I've realized now, going back to my time where Oliver was the sickest baby on the NICU floor, like they told us that there's 40, 50 babies in there and he was the sickest one. So we've been in the thick of it. This is not a conversation just for the good of times. This is a conversation most important for the parents following our platforms whose kids are the sickest and are struggling the most. They will go after you and they will get a hold of you the most for good reasons. What I find is, and that's this family, the story I told you the other day, their oldest beautiful baby girl, she's got some very significant genetic challenges. They need medical experts on their team. We have many patients like this, right, in our practice, where it is very important for the health of that family that they have a crisis care expert on call, up to speed on their kid's case. So it's not as easy for the chronic illness, the seizure family, the spectrum family, the autoimmune family to unplug from the system, because you'll have seen these pediatricians and these folks kind of come in and be saviors. But when we expose, that's not the right word. When we talk about it here on this podcast today, what they did was they put a fire out. Awesome. Keep them on speed dial. If your kiddo was more prone to fires, running this, you definitely want to remain close access to the emergency system. Thank goodness we have that, in the world that we live in now, better than ever. But the better they are at putting out fires, I have found again and again, the worse and least resistant they are to rebuilding houses and restoring. Emergency experts don't have the single first clue about natural health and healing. So Dr. Stan, if I can ask you that, those families that are really, really plugged in, I feel like do you feel like it's really important for them to then find that integrative, holistic medical provider, the one that can pull that card if needed, but will pull it only as the last resort? And how do you serve families, you're a huge perfect storm practice out there, right? And you're in California in the thick of what brews storms, right? Mm-hmm. And so what are some unique components you would think, as you hear me go on that rant, for those perfect storm families, those epilepsy families that you would add as advocacy and support?
I would say that, this is one of the hardest things in California, right? Because those doctors, the way that they politically pigeonholed them, they've all left. And many of the people that I used to collaborate with, that I used to co-manage with, like they are not in the state anymore because of their openness, were actually investigated. They're board investigated. There's like, I know at least a dozen personally that have left the state. And so this couldn't be more important, because what we know is that you may not find that doctor that is open, but you may find that doctor that isn't willing to capture every aspect of all of your choices, right? And the reason why that's important is because we can somewhat operate in different ecosystems and still serve in the greatest capacity. This is really important. What you shared earlier, Dr. Tony, is something that the way that I've said it is that your life potential is based upon your health potential. Your ability to create an amazing life is based on a foundation of nervous system driven radical vibrancy and health that can be created still despite being somewhat plugged into the system. And I would argue has to be emphasized to the nth degree, more so exponentially than anyone who can completely free themselves from the system. Sometimes we have providers, sometimes other pediatric chiropractic providers, and not to kind of put anybody down, but anybody that kind of does the vanilla thing, like, hey, just do your research, right? Hey, you know what? Eat well, move well, think well might be a good thing to do. It's like, yeah, and the encyclopedias and volumes of lifestyle transformation that you can do from conception to pregnancy to birth to immediate postpartum, like you guys did for your son, like we did for my son. I don't even think I've ever shared with you the story that about my son. But the one thing that I knew with my son and his journey was the hope that they rob from you isn't just the paradigm that they have. I started to realize this because I was in this, we had to go into ophthalmology and we had to like figure out something with my son's eyes because we just knew that something was off at the beginning. And then when I saw the conversations from the medical providers who actually got us into these offices in an expedient way because of the history of my relationships, I saw the way that they were talking about my son. I saw the way that they were communicating about my family. And I started to ask more questions because I was like, wait a minute, they don't just believe in the genetics, right? They don't just believe that there's no like physiological hope. They don't believe that there isn't an innate driven self-healing, self-adapting, self-regulating potential in every child. They are legally bound. They are medically, legally bound to rob you of hope because if they give you too much hope, you can sue them. And so this is really important sometimes for families to recognize that you have to almost put on a different lens through your eyes, different headphones to be able to in real time translate the language that they have. You don't have to fire back with any sort of opposition because there is no openness to their ability to actually understand some of the things that you're looking for. And in those spaces, you have them hyper-focused on saving your kid. When there's a fire, you don't call the plumber. You don't call the electrician. You don't call the contractor. You call the fire department because they do the thing they do best. They save your house. They save your life. Axes and fire hoses, drugs and surgery. They do it. Great. In that space, put that fire out. Immediately have the cachet, the echelons of providers that are going to be able to put your child back together in real time because the real fires are really existing for many of the families, especially in our practice. So we can't take a stance. We're just like myopically anti everything because some kids absolutely have those fires that are continually like just a part of their everyday life, not every day, right? Because as we get them, they're less frequent, they're less fiery, and they actually just start to just be able to self-extinguish on their own, right? But if you don't have sometimes that legion of providers, and I don't think it's just a mode protocol, and I don't think it's just, a parasite cleanse, right? Correct. I'm not putting those down at all. What I'm going to say is that there are foundations that you and I both know, right? In the way that we've kind of been brought into this field, it isn't just like, okay, your nervous system is optimized. We know that we have an innate genetic potential that is far greater than we've ever been allowed to believe. And that me in the journey of the Future Gen podcast is I've interviewed people where I start, like I said, I have some families in my community now that have never had the system in their bloodstream, in their bodies, in their genetics ever. And you're like, whoa. Like their normal is frighteningly amazing. And I interviewed someone who is the modern day Weston Price. Her name is Mary Ruddard. And she taught me like how in these like ancestral tribes, not just hunter-gatherers, there's Fisher tribes, there's all sorts of ancestral tribes that still exist. She's like, there are no words for depression. There are no words for anxiety. There is no even impetus for I need my space. There is no fertility issue. But that's focusing on the symptom. What do they have? They have a normalized, multi-generational, high momentum, continual procreation
of the greatest expression of human potential that we don't have a framework for today, that you and I humbly don't, because we're modern humans living in captivity, right? And so the point is we need to recognize that the bar is way higher than we know, and that you need providers that are going to walk that ladder with you. And sometimes parents are like, ooh, Mom, you just taught me 3 floors up, and we're going to do that together because you all are at the tip of the spear, just like we are in this in the healthcare as providers. That if everybody's just seeking out that excellence, doesn't matter what your kid has, we need to seek out that radical excellence for that extraordinarily vibrant health. And then it may not be this generation, but we see it unwind. But when your kids, who I've been in practice 13 years, right? So the first kids in my practice came in baby carriers. I just looked up some old pictures. They're 12, 13, right? That in about a decade, they're going to be investigating who they are going to live life with, create life with, that what will be normal for them is this radically vibrant health, all the choices that they made, this radical, like continual just removal of the, dare I say, enslavement to the system, but just separation from the system. But they also realize that when they choose their partner and they get married and they have their wife and their husbands, and they start to realize that those values aren't like, they can't be contradictory, and it's not to homogenize, but it's to recognize what becomes normal is the normalization of all those questions and all those conversations, all those decisions that they made. And then when they bring those 2 half cells together, which BJ Palmer would affectionately say, 2 half cells, 280 days, and a 26 billion cell comes out that no mom has to consciously control, that process in that higher state of potential, man, that's God right there, right?
Yes,
that's what you see over and over. And then you, which I've said for like 3.5 years now, right? We're already seeing the divide, not in a negative way, in the reality of choices and belief systems, that we're seeing 2 species emerge.
Yep.
And the species that is normalizing normal, vibrant health is already like captivating, like humanity. But what happens in 10 years?
Yeah.
What happens when our kids are making those choices to find their families, right? And then what happens in multi-generations, which is why we're called future generations, is we will remember that. I don't think we're going to forget how like dark it was, because I think the darkness is going to continue. But we're going to be so radically vibrant, embodying a level of, and a level of health and freedom, that we won't even recognize that, one, there's another species over there that's running in that rat race that has no winner and there's no exit from. But we're not ever going to need it, because we've already done the work, right? To unwind, unravel all the chronic stuff, but then build from that strong foundation of neurodevelopment, neurobehavior, nervous system regulation, life of our dreams, man.
That's it.
That's what we're going to do for our kids.
That is it. That is everything. And that is a beautiful culmination. The last thing I want to have right now, my friend, is a culmination to this conversation. I don't know how you do this podcast thing where we get to have these incredible conversations, but they need to have a beginning, which is exciting, and a middle, which is like, oh, we're cooking now, but then they have to have an end, you know, but we're going to find a path to not do it, because not only are you coming back, we're going to make all the connections, but that was the perfect culmination, because it brought to life the beginning of our conversation, where we said, parents, where should you set your, and we're not big should people, but for this part of it, let's just use it. Where can you absolutely positively, and I know how nerve-wracking and maybe so awkward and like, are you sure I can sort of feeling that will invoke, but you absolutely positively can set your goal to be absolutely optimal. And that was an absolute overuse of the word absolutely intentionally, to say, go for it, but do not go for it, one, without asking questions of your doctors, And that will get you to 2, which is do not go for it alone, because that one step, the one most important action step we talked about throughout this entire podcast, ask those questions of your doctors. It will illuminate the divide. And I agree, Dr. Stan, that is not a bad divide. That is a wonderful divide that will change this world for the good. It is it's happening. It is on fire. There is a movement back towards these principles of natural health, back towards taking charge of our health, understanding we are in charge of it. Our kids teaching these principles to our children, being connected to God, being responsible for our health, and saying through those choices, through those questions, we make those choices to possibly, fire some people from our healthcare team, right? Or at least put like way back, you were in my top 5, you were in my favorites, you were in the group chat, now you're all the way like you're in the only going to call you if I absolutely got to call you and still probably not 10 list. So you might get rid of some people out your way, and then that will clear the way for the doctors you've been hoping for. Yeah, because we lean into hope. We don't squelch it. We freaking light it up. And then you're going to find and receive those empowered answers. And we're honestly definitely not going to force them down and make you have them. We're going to guide you to them. We're going to lead you to them. So the PX Docs platform of hope, answers, and help, it goes in that order for a reason. We provide the hope so that the answers reveal themselves, and then the action comes from that. So the action I want you to do, everybody listening to this, is fall in love with this Experience Miracles podcast. If you're not already, hitting whatever little button you need to follow and download. I hope your phone goes haywire every Tuesday when we drop a new podcast episode. Like it starts flashing and vibrating and doing all this stuff, because you need this. You get this. We are so stoked to give it to you. And then absolutely do the same with the Future Generations podcast. The Future Gen podcast, I can tell you, save lives, because I've met some of them. I've cared for some of them. I've placed my hands on Cole, whose beautiful mom, rock star mom, Nicole, became an advocate, became empowered through your podcast, buddy. And we got the chance to save and got this job done and saved Cole's life. And Dr. Stan closed us with this. There is a foundational move you need to move towards. And that is understanding everything you possibly can, not just about these principles and these perspectives and this amazing lens that we promise you is going to be exactly aligned with your values and will move you towards that vibrant, radical, incredible life. But it's the nervous system. If there's one thing you'll hear us talk about again and again on our podcast and on our platforms, when we get down to the roots of it, when we get down to the foundational action steps of it, just like Dr. Stan kicked us off with today, nervous system regulation is the answer. It is the action step that all healing must start with, because this whole perfect storm world, including the stress and the emotional trauma of being bullied by the system, where that sets up shop is not in our genetics and not in our gut. First and foundationally, it sets up shop in our nervous system and in our children's nervous systems. So learn everything you possibly can. Get over to pxdocs.com and check out those articles and those resources there. Get to our YouTube page and watch those educational videos where there's visuals and different things that bring the perfect storm and these conversations to life. And then just please, we ask, we beg, share the heck out of this. And I know I might be asking this early before it's all the way ready, Stan, but you've been a part of the movements that I've been trying to make for years. And I am the eternal hype man who will launch something moments after I've had the idea, let alone even built it out and recorded one video. So I know you are in the early stages of this as we talk about today, but can you take us home by sharing not just a little more information about your platform as it exists now, but about this really impactful thing that you're building that will do what we talked about today? Could you take us home giving us information about where to find that?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little context first. Like, I taught a vaccine workshop, and then I taught essentially a perfect storm. And one class was families that are already very literate in natural health and self-healing, and the other was totally brand new. And when I present the statistics, we've talked ad nauseum about 54% of our kids, chronic illness, 1 in 6 with a neurodevelopmental disorder, 1 in 4 in the United States requires special education. Yeah. And I tell them, hey, those statistics are 12 years old. Is it better or worse now? Both groups, different backgrounds, different belief systems about their health and their kids' health, unequivocally say it's worse. We know it's worse. Everybody knows that our kids' health is in a trajectory of statistical demise. And in the end, that's in both camps, right? And so our healthy families who already have a good literacy in their understanding of natural health and self-healing are still having some challenges. And largely, and I will say this because most of them don't have a PX nervous system focused chiropractor. Why is that important? We have more resources. Well, on the one side, more medicine, more doctors, more drugs, more whatever, more products on that side, more pharma. And on this side, we have more natural health. We have more functional medicine. We have more protocols. We have more, the sea of opportunity to do and take hold of your child's health is greater than ever. Why a PX doc is so much more important is when we show you scans, objective measurements, we're kind of giving you an idea of where your kid is now, but where they've been, right? Where their nervous system has been. And then we can paint a path forward, which is what is absolutely possible with a plan moving forward. But what we can do often is based on those objective measurements, look at where primary issues are. We call them primary subluxation patterns. That's what we talk about clinically on the back end, right? Which we don't always say every time with every patient. But what we can do is guide them through the sea of infinity choices with a higher priority. And that's what we have literally tried to do at Future Generations is we know that there are foundations. There are no doubt things that everybody has to understand about their beliefs about health, about their understanding, about the system, but also like how you actually put your head on your pillow at night, knowing with the fullest amount of peace of mind, the beliefs and the actions that you do foundationally every single day so your family is thriving. Second is we know, like you just shared about, is there's a darkness, there's an evil. And there's an evil that I had to come to grips with because I used to think healthcare was just dumb. I used to just think, oh, they don't know anything about health. And then you start to realize it's this system that's super, super dark that is installed in us, psychological operations since 10 with the Flexner Report, Rockefeller Medicine, over 100 years of brainwashing that many of us providers still have to sift through to some degree. And it's unraveling. It's a phase of unraveling and unwinding and dismantling these disempowering beliefs, but also kind of shedding all those habits that are still polluting and flooding your system with trauma and toxicity in your kids. But the third is, how do you reinstall?
Yeah.
How do you regenerate? How do you rejuvenate? And how do you create into these kids, but also ourselves, the most radically empowering beliefs and the most radically fulfilling habits and actions? And that's what we're creating. We're calling it the curriculum. And it's basically a 3-phase where we're creating the foundations. We're deleting and reducing the disempowering beliefs and habits. And then we're reinstalling, which we know is not everything because there's a sea of so much that's out there. But I promise you that third month is the lifestyle habits that maybe you become abreast to, but it's on rocket fuel because what we need to create momentum in our kids' healing and our kids' mindsets is that armor of God that most of us don't even have a framework for because we haven't recognized the darkness that's out there to the degree. But that's what we're doing. It's going to launch sometime this summer. I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to share about it. But what I know the end goal is an empowerment of belief systems, radical empowering belief systems, but following that up with actions and habits so that parents and their kids are so healthy and vibrant, so embodiment of their freedom that they never need the system again.
Absolutely love it. Cannot wait to see the curriculum. Cannot wait to share the curriculum. And you know this, brother man, if you need anything at all, any help at all, serving your community and making that curriculum come to life, hit me up, homie. I'm on it. You're up, even though you're my West Coast brother. You know, I live in Illinois. Guys, if this doesn't tell you our tenacity, the man lives in California and I live in Illinois. So, and we're joyful and we're vibrant and we've transformed. So it is possible. And the man responds to my text. I get up early and then I text him and he's already up. So that is my man, my brother. I love you. I miss you. I am so thankful for you. This conversation went, and I had high expectations, and it went infinitely better. We haven't really had this exact conversation yet on the podcast, and I couldn't wait to have it, and I knew you were the perfect person to lead it with us. So thank you, brother man. Can't wait to have you back again, and we'll see you soon.
Man.